America still looks calm at a glance. Job numbers haven't collapsed. Stock markets continue to project confidence. And from the outside it feels like the economy is holding together better than many expected. But that surface-level stability is hiding something far more fragile underneath. Across the country, households are carrying record levels of debt, while the cost of simply staying afloat keeps rising. Insurance premiums, utilities, housing, and everyday necessities are consuming a larger share of income every single month. At the same time, state governments, the financial backbone of schools, hospitals, roads, and emergency services, are quietly losing the buffers that once protected them from economic shocks. This is not a story about Wall Street volatility or short-term market swings. It's a story about Main Street pressure, about states whose economies rely on narrow industries, about budgets stretched thin, about families who can't absorb another increase in costs without something breaking. As the nation moves closer to a recession, one reality matters more than any headline number. Economic downturns do not hit evenly. Some states have the reserves, diversification, and income levels to bend without breaking. Others don't. And those weaker states will feel the pain first. The US economic collapse won't arrive as a single dramatic crash. It will unfold in waves, slowing growth, tightening credit, shrinking revenues. And when that happens, these 10 states will be standing closest to the edge. Number 10. Kentucky. Kentucky rarely appears in conversations about economic risk. It doesn't have runaway housing prices. It isn't dominated by speculative tech bubbles. And on the surface, life here still feels relatively stable. But that calm masks a deeper vulnerability, one rooted in income, industry, and limited financial flexibility. Nearly 1 in 5 residents lives below the poverty line, and median household income remains far below the national average. That alone wouldn't guarantee trouble. But when costs rise faster than wages, even small disruptions become dangerous. Over the past few years, essentials like utilities, groceries, and especially insurance have eaten away at what little financial margin many families once had. Kentucky's economy is also heavily exposed to cyclical industries. Manufacturing, agriculture, and energy still form the backbone of employment across large parts of the state. When national demand softens, factories cut shifts, farm revenues tighten, and energy-related tax income declines. These sectors don't slow gradually. They contract quickly when conditions worsen. Housing tells a similar story. Prices remain modest compared to coastal markets, but affordability is quietly deteriorating. Property taxes and insurance costs continue to rise, while higher interest rates have locked many homeowners in place. In rural counties, selling now often means taking a loss. Staying means absorbing higher monthly costs with stagnant income. Kentucky's risk isn't about excess. It's about fragility. A low-income base and limited diversification leave the state exposed when a recession arrives. Number 9. Rhode Island. Rhode Island may be America's smallest state, but its economic exposure is anything but small. Behind the historic harbors and postcard-perfect neighborhoods lies a financial structure with very little room for error. And as the national economy slows, that margin is disappearing fast. The state's problem starts with its fiscal cushion. Emergency reserves remain thin, leaving lawmakers with limited flexibility if revenues fall. When inflation persists and tax receipts soften at the same time, even a short downturn can force painful choices, cuts to public services, delayed infrastructure projects, or higher taxes that further strain households already under pressure. On the ground, the labor market has lost momentum. Tourism and healthcare, two of Rhode Island's most important economic engines, are showing visible signs of fatigue. Visitor spending has cooled. Smaller hotels are struggling to maintain occupancy. Healthcare systems face rising costs without matching revenue growth. Jobs are becoming harder to replace just as living expenses climb. Housing magnifies the strain. Median home prices sit far above what local incomes can comfortably support, creating one of the sharpest affordability gaps in the region. Many middle-class families now rely on credit to cover basic housing costs, pushing household debt steadily higher. What once felt manageable during years of low interest rates now feels suffocating. Adding to the risk is a long-standing pension burden that continues to loom over the state's finances. As inflation erodes fixed incomes and investment returns fluctuate, retirees and taxpayers alike are exposed. Rhode Island's danger isn't sudden collapse. It's exhaustion. A small economy, limited reserves, and rising costs pulling in opposite directions until something finally gives. Number 8. Idaho. For years, Idaho was held up as a model of post-pandemic success. Clean air, open land, and relatively low costs turned the state into a magnet for remote workers, retirees, and investors fleeing more expensive regions. Growth came fast, and for a while it felt unstoppable. But by the time recession pressures begin to build, that rapid expansion has become Idaho's greatest weakness. The population surge strained everything at once. Housing demand exploded, pushing prices far beyond what local wages could support. Infrastructure lagged behind. Schools, roads, and public services struggled to keep pace. Now, as interest rates remain elevated, the momentum has reversed. Home listings are sitting longer. Inventories have risen sharply. Buyers have pulled back. Many households that purchased near the peak are watching their equity disappear. Idaho's economy is also narrowly exposed. Real estate, construction, agriculture, and a growing but fragile tech sector carry much of the state's growth. Each of these sectors is highly sensitive to higher borrowing costs and slowing consumer demand. Construction activity has cooled. Farm exports have softened. Layoffs in Boise's tech corridor are becoming more common. Meanwhile, household finances are tightening. Debt levels have climbed steadily, and a growing share of families now spend an unsustainable portion of their income just to stay housed. Property taxes and insurance costs continue to rise even as wage growth slows. Idaho didn't collapse because it failed. It expanded too quickly with too little margin for error. When growth stalls, states built on momentum feel the shock first. Number 7. Arizona. For much of the past decade, Arizona looked unstoppable. People poured in from higher-cost states, drawn by sunshine, space, and the promise of a more affordable life. Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Tucson became symbols of post-pandemic migration success. But as the economy tightens, the same forces that fueled Arizona's rise are now pushing it towards strain. Housing sits at the center of the problem. Prices surged far faster than local incomes, especially in the Phoenix metro area. Even after recent cooling, home values remain well out of reach for many residents. A growing share of households now spend more than a third of their income just on housing, leaving little room for rising insurance, utilities, and transportation costs. Arizona's fiscal position adds another layer of risk. Budget reserves remain thin relative to the size of the state's obligations, limiting the ability to cushion a prolonged slowdown. At the same time, construction activity, once a key driver of job growth, has slowed sharply. New projects are being delayed or cancelled as financing costs stay high and demand softens. Tourism, another major pillar of the economy, is also losing momentum. Visitor numbers have cooled. Hotel occupancy has declined. Discretionary spending is under pressure. When tourism weakens, the effects ripple quickly through restaurants, retail, and local services. Perhaps most concerning is the shift in migration. The inflow that once sustained demand is slowing, and some households are beginning to leave in search of lower costs elsewhere. Arizona's challenge is no longer growth. It's affordability and endurance. Number 6. Nevada. Nevada's economy has always moved with the flow of visitors. When tourism thrives, the state expands quickly. When it slows, the effects are immediate and unforgiving. As recession pressures build, that dependence is becoming a serious liability. Gaming, hospitality, and entertainment remain the backbone of Nevada's job market, particularly in Las Vegas. But as households across the country cut discretionary spending, fewer travelers are booking trips. Conventions are shrinking. Entertainment calendars are thinning out. Hotel occupancy has fallen and casino revenues have softened, warning signs that rarely stay isolated for long. The labor market is already feeling the impact. Service sector layoffs are rising and unemployment remains among the highest in the region. When tourism contracts, it doesn't just affect casinos. Restaurants lose diners. Retail traffic drops. Sales tax revenue declines, squeezing state and local budgets that rely heavily on consumer spending. Housing, once a bright spot, is no longer providing support. Prices have begun to slip. Inventory has climbed. Foreclosures are quietly reappearing in parts of the Las Vegas metro area. Many homeowners who bought late in the boom now owe close to what their properties are worth, limiting mobility just as economic conditions worsen. Nevada also lacks a meaningful financial buffer. With limited budget reserves, even a moderate drop in revenue can force rapid spending cuts to schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. Nevada has survived downturns before, but always by rebounding quickly. This time, the recovery may not arrive fast enough. Number 5. Indiana. Indiana has long been viewed as a symbol of economic reliability. Manufacturing plants, logistics hubs, and distribution centers form the backbone of the state's identity. When America builds and ships, Indiana benefits. But that strength becomes a weakness when national demand begins to cool. Manufacturing is deeply cyclical, and the early signs of slowdown are already visible. Factory output has softened. Hours have been reduced. Hiring freezes are spreading across industrial corridors. In towns built around a single plant or employer, even small cutbacks ripple outward. Fewer shifts mean fewer paychecks. Lower local spending. Shrinking tax revenue almost overnight. Indiana's housing market once appeared resilient thanks to relatively low prices. But affordability is eroding, as wages struggle to keep pace with rising insurance, utilities, and property taxes. A growing share of renters now spend an unsustainable portion of their income just to stay housed, while homeowners face higher monthly costs with little prospect of refinancing relief. The state's fiscal flexibility is also limited. Budget reserves offer only modest protection, leaving little room to respond aggressively if unemployment rises further. Meanwhile, household debt has climbed steadily, and evictions are becoming more common as financial pressure builds. What makes Indiana particularly vulnerable is structural concentration. Communities tied to one industry don't have easy alternatives when that industry slows. Unlike diversified metro economies, these regions can't pivot quickly. Indiana isn't collapsing because it's unstable. It's at risk because it's exposed. Number 4. South Carolina. For much of the past decade, South Carolina marketed itself as a low-cost alternative to more expensive coastal states. Warm weather, lower taxes, and a surge of new residents fueled rapid expansion in housing construction and tourism. But as economic conditions tighten, that growth model is beginning to show serious cracks. Housing sits at the center of the slowdown. Prices climbed quickly during the migration boom, but incomes never caught up. Now affordability is stretched thin, and demand has softened. Construction activity has slowed sharply, leaving partially completed developments on the edges of growing metro areas. What once signaled opportunity now reflects overconfidence. Tourism, another pillar of the state's economy, is also under pressure. As households cut back on discretionary spending, fewer travelers are booking beach vacations and weekend getaways. Lower visitor numbers translate directly into weaker revenue for hotels, restaurants, and local businesses, sectors that employ a large share of the workforce. South Carolina's fiscal position compounds the risk. Budget reserves remain limited, restricting the state's ability to cushion a prolonged downturn. Job losses have begun to concentrate in construction, hospitality, and retail, industries most sensitive to economic cycles. Many residents move to South Carolina seeking affordability and stability. Instead, they're finding rising costs and shrinking opportunity. South Carolina's challenge isn't whether growth will slow. It already has. The real question is how deep the correction will go. Number 3. Mississippi. Mississippi doesn't need a recession to expose its weaknesses. Those weaknesses have been visible for years. What a national downturn does is remove any remaining margin for error. And in Mississippi, that margin is already dangerously thin. Income levels remain among the lowest in the country, while poverty affects a disproportionate share of the population. For many households, paychecks barely cover necessities even in good times. When prices for energy, insurance, and food rise, there is no buffer left to absorb the shock. One missed paycheck can trigger a chain reaction of unpaid bills, debt, and housing instability. Public systems are under constant strain. Healthcare access remains limited. Rural hospitals continue to close. Education funding lags behind national norms. Infrastructure tells a similar story. Aging roads, bridges, and water systems require investment that state and local budgets struggle to provide. These aren't abstract problems. They directly affect productivity, safety, and long-term growth. Mississippi's economy is also narrowly concentrated. Agriculture, manufacturing, and public sector employment dominate large portions of the state. Each of these sectors is highly sensitive to downturns, especially when government revenues decline. When cuts come, they hit services residents already depend on most. Housing may appear affordable, but ownership is increasingly fragile. Rising insurance costs and utility bills are turning modest homes into financial burdens. Many families remain homeowners in name, only one repair or premium increase away from crisis. Mississippi's risk isn't sudden collapse. It's prolonged stagnation that deepens with every economic shock. Number 2. Colorado. For years, Colorado was held up as proof that modern growth could work. A strong tech sector, steady migration, and an attractive lifestyle pushed the state into a decade-long expansion. But by the time recession pressures arrive, that success has left Colorado dangerously overextended. Housing is the clearest warning sign. Prices climbed far faster than incomes, especially along the Front Range. Even after recent cooling, home values remain out of reach for a growing share of residents. Rents have risen sharply, pushing more households into cost burden. What once felt like prosperity now feels exclusionary. The labor market is also losing momentum. Layoffs have spread through tech, construction, and tourism, the very sectors that powered Colorado's growth. These jobs tend to disappear quickly when financing tightens and discretionary spending slows. As employment weakens, consumer confidence follows, creating a feedback loop that drags on local economies. Household finances are under mounting pressure. Debt levels have increased. Credit balances are harder to manage. Higher interest rates have removed the escape hatch of refinancing. At the same time, state and local governments face tighter budgets, limiting their ability to respond as social service demands rise. Colorado's core problem isn't decline. It's imbalance. The state grew too fast, relied too heavily on high-skill and speculative sectors, and allowed housing costs to outrun fundamentals. Colorado still has long-term strengths, but without a reset, those strengths won't prevent short-term pain. Number 1. Louisiana. Louisiana has faced hardship for generations. Hurricanes, floods, and economic shocks are part of its history. But what makes this moment different is that the state is entering a national downturn with almost no financial margin left. When recession pressures arrive, Louisiana isn't bracing for impact. It's already absorbing it. The state's fiscal position is among the weakest in the country. Budget reserves remain extremely thin, leaving little protection if revenues fall. When energy prices soften or tourism declines, the effects hit immediately. Unlike larger or more diversified states, Louisiana has limited alternatives to replace lost income. The economy itself is tightly concentrated. Energy, tourism, and construction dominate employment across much of the state. Each of these sectors is highly sensitive to economic slowdowns, interest rates, and global demand. As projects are delayed and travel slows, jobs disappear quickly, and many of them don't return. Household finances are under relentless strain. Incomes have stagnated while insurance premiums, utilities, and housing costs continue to climb. Flood and property insurance have become especially burdensome, turning routine storm seasons into financial emergencies. For many families, ownership is no longer a path to stability but a source of constant risk. Infrastructure tells the final part of the story. Aging roads, levees, and water systems require investment that shrinking budgets can't provide. Each disaster leaves damage that takes longer to repair, weakening confidence and accelerating population loss. Louisiana's collapse wouldn't be sudden. It would be cumulative. A slow unraveling driven by exposure, dependence, and exhaustion. Across these 10 states, a clear pattern emerges. The greatest risks aren't tied to size or reputation but to imbalance. High debt, thin reserves, housing costs detached from income, economies overly dependent on fragile industries. As the U.S. economic collapse unfolds, the states most vulnerable to recession will feel the pressure first. This won't be a single nationwide crash. It will be a rolling downturn, tightening credit, weakening jobs, and straining public budgets before most people realize what's happening. Downturns expose what growth hides. And in that exposure lies both risk and opportunity. Which state shocked you the most? And which one do you think can still turn things around?